episode 1 of Songs from a Padded Envelope. My name is Steve and I'm here with co-host Ben. Hello, Ben.
Hi there, Steve.
So we've put out the introduction episode prior to this, so if you want to know a little bit more about the podcast and what it's all about, you can give that a listen. But Ben, I wanted to start by asking you how you're feeling about finally having our first episode ready to go.
Well, it feels great, Steve. I think from when we were talking earlier, one thing that we know for certain from our shared experiences in music is that rock and roll is going to offer up stories of all manner and description. And from this recent experience of putting the first episode together, I think we've found that the stories that have come out from these initial discussions have been pitched pretty much exactly where we wanted to find them, you know, in terms of capturing a real experience from an individual in terms of their musical journey and everything that went into that journey over time.
Yeah, so the first interviewee is Dave Hulegaard, who is over in Washington, in the US, and Dave got in touch through the fantastic early 90s indie Twitter feed, and he sent over some really interesting music and some photos and a biog and all that kind of stuff. But which we both went through and sort of in setting ourselves up for having the conversation with Dave, hearing his story and then going and listening to his music. It's sort of framed it in a different way, isn't it? When you get to the end of the episode and you hear the song that he's talking about and hear a bit more about his journey, it's quite evocative, isn't it? That moment of listening to the song.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think, you know, we've had some discussions around this, and I really enjoyed everything that Dave sent over to us. It really, you know, the pictures and the vast diversity of music from the beginning of his career to music that he's making now. We were able to get a real picture about who this individual was, and he'd you know, the choice that he made for the song for this first episode was from the very start of his kind of career, and it you know, as he acknowledges, it's not without its faults. It's a very real and raw piece of music that captures the you know, the kind of essence of an individual's first venture into making music, but kind of listening to that at the end of the episode, having had those discussions with Dave and having had him share a whole myriad of stories, you know, some really endearing stories, some of which were very sad and very heartfelt, and some of which were full of elation that hearing that song, having had the context of those stories, was completely different, wasn't it?
Yeah, really. Yeah, it really was. So I suppose we should go to that conversation with Dave Hulegaard. If you're listening to this and you would like to share some of your music and be part of an upcoming episode, you can contact us on email, and the address is songsfromapaddedenvelope@gmail.com. But sit back and enjoy the very first episode of Songs from a Padded Envelope with Dave Hulegaard.
Well, my name is Dave Hulegaard. I am in Washington, over in the United States. I'm about 60 miles outside of Seattle, Washington. So definitely in the shadow of all that great music scene that I'm sure a lot of us grew up with. I'm older, so I was born in the 70s, and I really kind of came into music at a very young age. So I got to go through all the awesome 80s and 90s, and I think that was a big part of what drew me to music in the first place, and then it led me to this conversation with you guys, which is awesome.
I think we're in the same boat in terms of timeline as well, Dave.
Perfect.
So at the end of the show, we're going to listen to a song from a demo that you recorded back in the 90s, but we wanted to sort of kick off with just asking you to introduce that song and
and talk a little bit about that band and how you got to the point of making those recordings?
Sure. Well, the song that I really resonated the most with from that demo is a song called Ocean Boulevard, and it's so embarrassing now, all these years later, to be looking back at music that was recorded in the 90s, and mainly because of sound quality, I think, for one, because I go back and listen to that demo, and I remember that day quite well, that we had. It was just me and my drummer Fred at the time, and we had booked studio time with this guy who was kind of like a friend of a friend of a friend sort of thing, and his studio was in a basement in his house in Portland, Oregon. And when we got there, our time was booked, and we were there on time. But this guy and his wife were diehard computer gamers, so they were so deep into this game that they wouldn't stop playing so that we could go record the demo.
Oh, I love that.
So we wound up just kind of hanging out in their living room while they were playing this game on their computer. But anyway, but we recorded the demo in an entire afternoon. And
so how old were you guys at that point then, Dave?
Oh, geez, I was 19. Yeah, just a young kid, fresh out of high school, and I had saved as much money as I possibly could from working at McDonald's to pay for the studio time.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I remember my sort of making my first demo, and at that time you used to flick through the back of the Melody Maker and look at all the adverts for the places you could go and record, and I think we just stuck a pin in it in the end and said, well, that looks like one. So we ended up in this place, going into this guy's backyard and into some innocuous den that was, it sounds like a similar experience to your own. Someone that didn't really care too much about recording music, but they liked the money at the end of the day.
Oh yeah. Well, if it's a Melody Maker, I mean, how do you not think that's legit, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. That was the very first recording that you'd done?
Yeah, I mean, up until that point, like everybody else who'd ever had a kind of a high school garage band, you recorded demos with like a boombox or something, or maybe somebody was lucky enough to have a Tascam like four-track portable studio, and I've done over the years many recordings on a 4-track, but that was like our actual first studio recording, and I think I had this idea in my head of what it was going to be, like, didn't we all, right? We had this vision of this fancy studio that was going to have 24 karat gold walls and all these amazing things, right? Guitars hanging as far as the eye could see, and it was just a dingy basement.
So tell us a little bit about the band, Dave. So who was in the band, and how did the band come together?
So when I started, I was really interested in being in a band from kind of my earliest teenage years, and I didn't know how to play any instruments at that time. So I thought, well, the only way I'm going to make this work is as a singer. And so I had gotten together with some friends of mine. My friend Josh was a bass player, and my friend Travis was a guitarist. And it was really just the three of us at first, and we went through so many drummers, just trying to find the right fit over the years. And it just seemed like anytime we would finally find a drummer, then Josh and I would have a falling out, and then we didn't have a bass player, so then it was going through bass players, and eventually that dynamic didn't work. That the kind of trio, the original trio of us, didn't work, and I broke away completely. And somebody had recommended Fred, as he was a drummer that went to a different high school, and we just had mutual friends. So Fred was a little older than me at the time, and well, he still is, but I didn't really know how to approach him, because he's this older guy I don't know, seems like a cool dude. And I sent him a recording of, it was just something somebody had recorded on like a boombox at a concert, and I just sent that to him, and it was terrible. Like, the recording is terrible, the quality is terrible. but he said that he heard something in it that just really, stuck with him. And so he wanted to pursue it with me. And so that's kind of what brought him and I together. And then we remained the core of sort of that iteration of the band. I kind of went through different, I guess, what do you want to call it? Like a nucleus, right? Like a different versions of this band. And so that was kind of the second version where it was Fred and I, and we still struggled with finding everything else. But by this point, I had taught myself how to play guitar. So that kind of solved that issue. And then we eventually ended up with a bass player named Andrea, and she was awesome. Just definitely right in the same vein that we were going for. And right before we recorded that demo that I sent you guys, she quit. So what you hear on that demo is just Fred and I, with me horribly providing the bass tracks. So needless to say, that demo was never going to make it to Geffen Records.
And at that point, Dave, what was your musical inspiration? So what were the bands that were kind of key and significant to you at that time?
It's funny because I think like a lot of people in that age group, I was really drawn to what was happening in, what eventually became known as alternative rock. I really was really into like the Nirvanas and the Pearl Jams, all that kind of stuff. But the band that really kind of kicked the door open for me was Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah.
I don't know. I heard something in that music that was different, and I remember getting a copy of Gish on cassette because I'm that old. Where we had cassettes, but getting a copy of Gish was, I swear, it was like a musical awakening. It's the best way I can describe it. It was an education, and it was just really just jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring. Every superlative I can throw at it. But
it's an incredible record, isn't it? And still sounds incredible.
Yeah, to this day, it remains one of my favorite records of all time. And that was kind of the end for me. I was like, well, now that I've heard this, like that's what I need to be doing with my life.
Uh-huh.
But in practice, I was just not a good guitar player. I was no Billy Corgan by any stretch. And so what I found is that I would play guitar, and I was teaching myself, and I was using chord books and things like that. And so I would find these really nice sounding chords, right? Like all the bands that I was into were all into power chords and distortion, but I didn't know any better. I was like, well, but these open A chords sound amazing with the diminished seventh. Like this is incredible. So next thing I know, I'm writing music that sounds more like the Lemonheads, and a lot less like the Smashing Pumpkin stuff that I'm really into. But that worked out well for me because it really helped me define what my sound was. And sorry, go ahead.
And were you liking the Lemonheads at that point? Was that a band that was...
Yes, yeah. I remain a massive Lemonheads fan to this day. I really credit Evan Dando for helping me appreciate the sound of a jangly guitar.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. And that voice.
Yes, right.
You said before about the demo was never gonna make it to Geffen Records, but when you were going into that first session, what were your expectations? What were you thinking you were going to do with those recordings?
It's interesting because right now in 2020, Portland, Oregon is considered like one of the coolest, most hippest places in the country. And it's weird for me because I grew up there, and I don't live there anymore, but I grew up there, and to me, like, that's when Portland was cool. Like the 90s was like the time to have been in Portland, Oregon. And what it is now, and that could just be like an age thing, like maybe just my interests and hobbies, whatever, just don't really blend with what's happening there. But back then, the music scene in Portland, Oregon was the best that you could find arguably outside of like Seattle or Boston had some great things happening at that time. But for me, that was it. I was hearing these local bands that were just blowing my mind, and I'm like, well, that's what
tell us a little bit more about those local bands. What kind of bands were they?
Well, I think people are pretty familiar with Elliott Smith, nowadays. And back before Elliott Smith became, known for providing music to like the Good Will Hunting soundtrack and obviously everything that came after that, he was in a band called Heat Miser in Portland. And I would go out of my way to see Heat Miser. They were just, and I highly recommend looking them up if you're unfamiliar. Their music is incredible. And it's such a snapshot of what was happening in Portland at that time. And there was another band called the Spinanes that were incredible. And it was just a two-piece. It was Rebecca Gates on vocals and guitar and Scott Pluff on drums. And I took a lot of inspiration from that. Like I mentioned that we Fred and I really struggled to find a bass player. So hearing another band out there who was able to make it work with just a guitar and drummer, and I thought, well, hey, if they can do it, we can do it.
Yeah.
So that was my goal, was, kind of following in the footsteps of these giants, right, that were already there. And little did I know that those giants, that I'm kind of trying to follow in the footsteps of, like, they're trying to get out of Portland. They're trying to get to Seattle and get their music noticed on a bigger scale. So when we recorded that demo, I had dreams and hopes that we might be able to get recognized by like a small Portland label called Cavity Search Records that had been responsible for so many just fantastic records in that era, and that was my dream, but it was just not meant to be.
Did you get the demo to them at Cavity Search?
No, I think once I heard the demo. And don't get me wrong, like I love it in the way that, you love your children. But there was something going on at the time where I knew the band just wasn't going the way I wanted it to. Like, something was missing. And as much as I love Fred, and Fred and I still remain friends to this day, but by the time we hit kind of the mid-90s, it was very obvious to me that Fred and I just had different disciplines. Like, I was 100% focused on music and making it work and, turning into something, making something of myself. And Fred was a really good drummer, but he didn't have the same focus and drive that I did. So when we would play together, he would mess up a lot. And no matter how much we practiced, which was, at least 3 times a week, no matter how much we practiced, by the time we got to a show, he had already forgotten the transitions and the music. Or if I would say the name of a song, I'm reading the set list and saying, okay, well, we're going to play this one, and he would not know which one that was. And I would have to actually play like a bar for him to be like, oh, okay, that one.
I think this story's chiming with us, Dave. I think we've both been there before, haven't we, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great.
Dave, you mentioned in some of your initial communications with us that being in a band was so important to you. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a bit about what happened next for Apathy's Last Kiss?
Yeah, it's where my musical venture really splinters, because all of this was happening, like I mentioned with Fred, and we played an absolutely disastrous concert in Portland. And it was this thing where there was a local band that I was a huge fan of called Stereo Crush, and I had met the singer guitarist many times through different people, through different iterations, through other bands, just we had interfaced many times over the years. And he had put together this awesome band called Stereo Crush, and I desperately wanted to play a show with them. And so I had worked with a promoter to get this show booked, and I asked them to headline. I said, there's no way like I'm headlining this show, so let's bring you in. The thing was, they were starting to get really full of themselves at the time because they were starting to attract fan base and interest from labels and things like that. So they agreed to the show, which was great. But when Fred and I opened for them, and we really just had a bad night. We messed up a couple of songs. That was just kind of embarrassing. And Johnny was his name from the other band. He took the opportunity to make fun of us, which was really unpleasant.
That's hideous.
Yeah, it was this band that I loved and respected so much, and it was an honor to play with them, and just to have this horrible show and then have his reaction be to make fun of us. And it wasn't just a one-time thing, because he made fun of us during our set, and then when they played, he made fun of us again. And I was so humiliated that was the end. Apathy's Last Kiss was dead. I told Fred I never wanted to play another show, that I was done. So that was really another reason why the demo never surfaced, never materialized. It was just sitting in a box, in a shoebox in my closet for years. And that I really thought that was the end of music for me, to be completely honest. I was so heartbroken and humiliated that just the thought of even playing guitar or writing music or anything just seemed like an impossible thing from that point on.
So did that stop you for a good long while, or what brought you back to it? What made you turn away from that decision?
Well, after 1996, when all that happened, I still continued to play, in my bedroom. And I think that anyone who's ever played an instrument knows that feeling, that you can say you're going to walk away and you can say that you'll never touch that instrument again, but it calls to you. It really does. And over the next couple of years that followed, I continued to write music. And what I realized is that my songs were getting better, which I think is just kind of the natural maturation of experience. Like you continue to improve, so you hope, over time. And here over the next 2 to 3 years, I was writing songs that were so much better than what I had with Apathy's Last Kiss, like songs that I felt prouder to, kind of stamp my name on. And I was still determined at that point that I was never going to do music again. But what I wanted to do was get a recording of these songs, because I didn't want to walk away with nothing. I didn't want to have those dreams, and everything every effort I'd put into it, just have it be for nothing. So in 1999, I contacted a friend of mine who had opened a studio, and I asked him if I could just come in and record some songs, basically just to archive them, just so that I had something. And when we got to doing that, it was really his recommendation, where he was like, "Hey, do you mind if I spend some time on these songs? Like, I really like to, maybe put some bass and drums behind them." And I thought, whatever, sure. And a couple of weeks went by, and I wasn't really thinking anything of it. And he sent me the first kind of 2 or 3 recordings, and I had never heard my music sound like that, with like the full band treatment and sounding like a professional recording. And really that kind of woke me back up, where I was like, I've got to chase this feeling.
Yeah. So you hadn't heard anything that he was working on until he sent you the finished songs, as it were.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. That must have been incredible after that awful experience with the show, and the being humiliated, and then to for somebody to kind of have the opposite reaction to your music and say, "Do you know what? I'm hearing something here. I'm gonna go out of my way and put all this effort into supporting your music in that way." That must have been an incredible moment for you.
It really was. The first song that he sent me, or the first song that he completed, was a song called "Lost at Sea." And at the time, when I wrote that song, lyrically, it's a bit sophomoric, because I was definitely younger and my biggest problems in life were just kind of unrequited loves from high school, right? Like we all have plenty of those, but that's the kind of stuff I was writing about, and in super over dramatic fashion. I'd written Lost at Sea about this girl that I'd had a really big crush on, which of course a really big crush feels like love when you're a teenager, and and I heard this song for the first time with the full instrumentation behind it, and I actually got tears in my eyes.
Yeah.
Because it was what I had been chasing since I'd started playing guitar back in '94, and it took almost 6 years to finally hear my music the way that I'd always dreamed I would hear it.
And have you guys carried on working together after that?
As a matter of fact, he still owns a studio, and we're doing some recordings later this year. So I'm excited to get back in there and record newer stuff and see how that works.
That's fantastic. I wanted to just ask a little bit more about getting your music out to other people. So when those is this the 12 Days in June project that you're talking about now?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was after Apathy's Last Kiss. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when that music came to you after it had been sort of embellished and built upon, did that kind of rekindle any aspirations for getting that music out there? Did you send it out to other people? Did it sort of reignite the ambitions that you had as a musician?
Yeah, by the time that we were done with that project, and my goal had never been to record an album. It was really just, like I said, it's just to archive these songs. But by the time we were done, we came out of that process with, I believe, 12 or 13 songs, and it was really, again, his name is Josh. We're still very close today, and he has been a huge believer in me since the beginning, and it was really through his recommendation that I take advantage of different services that were available back then. So by the time the demo was completed, it was we were into 2000 at that point, and I can't remember the name of the service, but they still have similar things today where you can submit your music to like a review service, but you're not paying for reviews. It's like you have to listen to 10 reviews and then you earn a credit, and then you can use that credit to submit one of your songs for reviews. And it's all peers. It's not going to other labels or anything like that. And so that was really attractive to me back in 2000. And I thought, I'm going to take the two, what I believe to be the two best songs from this project, and I'm going to submit them and just kind of see what feedback I'm going to get. And what I noticed is that my music has always been very hard to classify. I think that, and I don't say that with hubris, like one of those people who thinks that what they're doing is special. I don't think what I'm doing is different, from anything that's ever been done. I just mean to say that when I think about the wide mixture of influences, right? My favorite music is everything from grunge to shoegaze to new wave, and really like everything in between. Whereas even now in 2020, I'm listening to a lot of ambient music, and I think that ambient music shares a lot of commonality with shoegaze and what I loved so much about the shoegaze movement of the early 90s. So when I was doing this peer review thing, and I would listen to, doing the requirement to listen to music that I was supposed to, and I wasn't hearing anything like what I'm doing or what I was doing, and a lot of bands were trying to emulate like Limp Bizkit, and like that was a big thing in the early 2000s. You kind of had that, and I forget what they classified the genre as, but you kind of had that revival of sorts of rock music that had sort of gone away in the late 90s and was starting to come back a little bit in the early 2000s. So I definitely knew I wasn't doing Limp Bizkit sounding stuff. And so I really tried to focus on bands that I loved. Like when I think about like my favorite bands of all time, and I like a lot of stuff that came out of like the Manchester scene. I mean, I'm sure you guys are familiar with what was going on there in the early 90s. Ned's Atomic Dustbin, the Wonder stuff. That is right up my alley, right? Those were some of the first bands that really got me wanting to play music.
Yeah.
And so I thought, if I could find others who were interested in that kind of music or playing that kind of music, that these were going to be my peers. And I just couldn't find that, no matter what I did. And that kind of made me lose hope that maybe what I was doing was outdated and that music had moved on. And certainly, I hate telling this story because it makes me look like a total idiot, but I was always a massive fan of Lush. And Lush has like Gala, I would say, is one of the greatest records of that era. And I had an opportunity to see Lush perform in an in record store concert. And it was when they were I forget the name of the album. Is it Love Life that had Lady Killers?
I don't know it.
Yeah, well, it was definitely a change in their music style. They had been kind of pioneers on the forefront of shoegaze, and then they had transitioned a little bit more into a poppier rock sound. And so I'm the singer was just looking at records, and I thought, well, here's an opportunity for me to introduce myself and talk about music. And yeah, she could not have been less interested to do that. So,
oh, what a shame.
But yeah, it was really things like that that made me think, like, all the bands that I still loved were changing their sound. And I know that happens over time, but what I was doing was still firmly rooted in kind of that early to mid 90s sound. And I thought my time had just come and gone, and that, people into Limp Bizkit were, kind of carrying us forward.
Well, a lot of what's coming across in what you're saying, Dave, in the stories is about the importance of, of creativity in people's lives. One of the things that Steve and I were touching on when we did the first introduction episode to the podcast was how essential creativity is. And once you kind of get that initial hit of making something and putting something out there, how life affirming it can be.
That's so true. All I wanted from the time I first learned to play guitar was to hear my music on a CD, right? Like I thought that's how you've made it, when your music is on a CD and you can select which track you want to hear off your CD, right? And I eventually accomplished that in 2000. And after that, it was like, well, there's more to do. Like just hearing music on CD was great, but I've got new goals now, and I wanted to continue refining my sound and continue writing music. And my weapons of choice changed a little bit. I kind of got off the distortion kick and focused more on acoustic music for a time, and then back and forth, and then kind of melding the two.
So you're going to be drawing in some of the ambient influences in the next set of recordings.
Yes, I have. I've been looking at some effects pedals that will really kind of give me that rising swell sound that I love so much from ambient music, and I'm still kind of experimenting a little bit. It was really getting a stereo reverb pedal was kind of life-changing, creatively speaking. Like Ben was saying, it's really thinking that you've hit your limits as a musician or as a songwriter. Of this is the pinnacle, right? Like we talked about at the very beginning about my song Ocean Boulevard from that Apathy's Last Kiss demo, and there was a time I thought that was the pinnacle of what I was ever going to do as a musician. And then came 12 Days in June, and Josh taking Lost at Sea and producing the heck out of it. And putting cool effects on it, like doubling my vocals, quad tracking my guitars, all these different things that obviously you can't replicate live without a lot of gear. But that's not the point, right? That's not the point of making a record. Is not necessarily to create something you're going to replicate live. It's to get the best sounding version of something you've created. At least for me.
Totally.
So when I started thinking about, well, I'm never going to get beyond Lost at Sea, then I wrote a song called Caroline, and Caroline was a song that was really the product of me just spending hours with a stereo reverb pedal and learning what was possible, like what could I accomplish. And I didn't have to play just, D, A, C, D, chord progressions. I could learn to play different things and get different sounds. And so here we are all these years later, and now you have companies like Walrus Audio that, in my opinion, make the best effects pedals possible. Just the sounds you can get out of these things are amazing. And so that's like another step, another venture. Like, what else can I do with these? It's never changing, but like you guys said, it's that never-ending search to keep finding your sound and creating.
Yeah, I think there's probably some merit in having a conversation later on with Ben about effects pedals, because he has got a lot of experience with those. And
Steve, I've just written down Walrus Audio here.
I had a feeling you might have.
Yeah. When Steve and I were talking earlier today, Dave, we were kind of we listened to the Apathy's Last Kiss stuff, and we listened to the 12 Days in June, and I think we were both really endeared, really liked the fact that you went back and chose something from so early in your music making career. Mm-hmm. That it just has, like you say, there's something very, very raw and very real and very honest about the presentation of that song. And it definitely, it has character to it. And I for one was really glad that you chose that, even though I really enjoyed listening to the 12 Days in June stuff and can hear everything you're saying about, I can imagine now that process of those songs coming together between you and Josh as well.
I just wanted to ask another question about your sort of how you're using your creative ideas now. Have you just stayed rooted to music, or have you sort of explored other creative avenues as well? I
definitely realized at an early age that I was going to have a hard time being an analytical sort of professional, like sitting behind a desk at a cube. Just didn't seem like a really good long-term venture. So I've always tried to pursue something creative, and my brain is just always chewing on something, whether it's music or telling a story, and just something to let me exercise like that part. And because I've always kind of, it's like a double life, right? There's that life where if we're lucky, we can get a job that we love, but a lot of the time we're working because we have to pay bills, and you can't wait to come home and sort of get into the things that you really care about, the things that you're really passionate about. And so I started writing, like actually writing stories, short stories, blog posts, and I was really influenced by a TV show called Lost. I'm sure you're familiar. Yeah. It was such a huge lightning bolt watching that show, and really kind of learning, like dissecting it to really understand the mechanics behind telling that massive story. And I know people's opinions differ, kind of how it all came together, but no matter what you think about how it ended, I think that the overall presentation is such a beautiful story, and it inspired me so much that I wanted to tell my own stories and really have fun with mystery and speculative fiction, things of that nature. And so I started writing short stories, and then that turned into, hey, like, you tell really fun stories, Dave. You should try writing a novel. And I'm like, okay. So I I tried writing a novel, and it was terrible. I probably next time you guys do like novels from a padded envelope, we can dive into that. But yeah, I think that it's just like anything else. If you don't know what you're doing when you get started, it doesn't matter. It's more important that you got started, not that you delivered the best that you're ever going to do right off the bat. So yeah, I wrote novels for about 10 years, and then I thought, novels are fun, and I love telling stories, but I don't know that it was necessarily the best outlet for me to tell stories. I think the publishing industry has changed a lot, and kind of what people are looking for is different, because the type of stories that I tell, even though if I'm a good enough writer, I can inspire people's imagination, but I think that people, thanks to, like, say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Star Wars, things that are so visually appealing, it's like, well, I don't want to read that. I don't want to read The Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker or Infinity Wars or whatever. You don't want to necessarily read it. You want to go see it on that massive screen with Dolby Atmos surround sound and whatever. So I kind of got away from books and thought about, what else could I do? Could I potentially write screenplays instead? And that's kind of something I'm still dabbling with a little bit. So maybe in the next year or so, hopefully I have something that I can be proud of.
Yeah, fantastic. Are you writing a short screenplay, or are you looking at a feature script?
I'm going for a full, like, kind of a minimum 90-minute sort of thing. See if I can do it. It's really just fun to challenge myself, even if nothing comes of it. It's like it's fun to look back and say I did it, which I guess taps into that archivist thing with my music, right? Same thing. It's just it's fun to have it and to look back and just be proud.
So I'm just thinking about that on that sort of tip. If in a sort of Back to the Future style, if you had a chance to write a letter to yourself, to the younger Dave, what advice would you give to yourself about being in a band or becoming a musician?
Don't give up. I mean, that as simple as it can be. I get very frustrated and angry at myself in current day, thinking that I was 19 years old when I got so frustrated that I said I don't want to play music anymore. And it's asinine to be 19 years old and not realize that there's still so much time. And I think that when we're young and we're in that moment, it's too difficult for us to think about patience, because the dream we want to live now.
Mm-hmm.
So why, who's going to be able to say, if I just keep working at it, if I keep grinding it out, in 2 or 3 years, I'm going to be where I want to be? But I mean, asking a 19-year-old to wait 2 or 3 years to reach their dream, that's a pretty tall order. And I wish that as a teenager, I had been blessed with more wisdom and more patience to realize that, yes, 1996 was incredibly frustrating, and it was humiliating, and everything I felt was completely legitimate, but it was not a reason to walk away. Because I'm not saying that I had what it takes to be a huge success or anything, but it was, at the very least, I think about what could I have accomplished musically if I'd never given up.
Mm.
And when I hear the music that I'm creating today, or if I go back and I listen to the 12 Days in June demo and things like that, it's like I was going somewhere. I don't know where, but somewhere. And if I just stuck with it, who knows?
Indeed, yeah. Dave, thank you so much for coming and being on the first episode of Songs from a Padded Envelope, and speaking so openly with us about your music and your creativity. And I mean, I haven't spoken to Ben about this, obviously, but I think it would be really nice to maybe revisit with you when your new demos are done, and to talk to you about them and talk about how find out how they've come out and how you feel about them, and put them on an episode. If you'd be interested in doing that, that would be great.
I would love that. Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be
Fantastic.
a lovely thing to do.
Can we just close with you introing the song that we're going to play now, and just teeing it up for us, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ocean Boulevard was, like I had mentioned earlier, it was a song that I had written that I felt I was never going to top, and it's hilarious to think that now, obviously looking back, but it was a song that really combined, in my opinion, the best elements of all of my musical influences at that time, because it was loud and distorted at points. It was really clean and jangly at others. It really brought everything that I loved musically, and then vocally, the demo's a little rough, and anyone listening is definitely going to hear that there's some sour notes here and there, but it was still something that I can look back on and proudly share, because I really enjoyed the process of writing it and putting it together. And what you're going to hear in this song is, it's going to sound pretty standard 4/4, bar chords, distortion, but I encourage you to stick with it because it really takes on a whole separate life. And you're going to hear me throw in my Smashing Pumpkins influences. I've got octaves moving up and down the frets. It really is the best way I can put it. It's a snapshot in time. Ocean Boulevard for me represents what the 90s side of my songwriting was like.
Dave, thank you
That's
so
a lovely
much.
thing.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, and we're going to close out with Ocean Boulevard by Apathy's Last Kiss.
Thank you guys so much.
I wanna have it Songs from a Padded Envelope is presented, produced and edited by Steve Swindon and Ben Clay. Music is by state-sponsored Jukebox. Artwork is by Matt Canning. Songs from a Padded Envelope is a Hidden Hive production.